Well, you were away for a full year, which the trend in study abroad is shorter term. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of a full year away?
Yes. You have to understand, my parents were wonderful human beings, but they did not have much formal education. My father had a 4th grade education. My mother was a high school graduate. Our travel consisted of, I was born in Winston, New York, until I was 14, and then we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. But my mother's family lived in South Georgia at a time when racism and segregation was in full effect. My paternal grandfather lived way upstate New York, in Malone, New York. The easiest way to get there if you fly is to fly into Montreal and then drive down. 2 different worlds, completely different worlds. But that's, every other year we were in one of those 2 places. But that was the extent of my travel experience. And so to have the opportunity to study overseas was breakthrough for me. The second time I was on a commercial airline was from New York to London. I was part of the first group that did not sail to Europe. We flew, which meant that we then spent a little over a week at Oxford University at King's College in preparation, orientation. Well, my first live play was in London. Oliver. The second one I saw is The Man in the Glass Booth, the trial of Adolf Eichmann. I sat mesmerized as during the preparation, he started talking and he got more invigorated. And then he stood up and he said, he talked about the history and the oppression of the German people. And then all of a sudden he's goose-stepping. And then he puts the Sieg Heil. And I'm at the edge of the seat. And he says, and if he had come to you, you too would have followed. And I fell back in my chair. That question has haunted me ever since 1967. That was the beginning of the impact. I know that everybody that I've talked to that said that study abroad is transformative. That word does not accurately capture what happened to me. My family moved to Atlanta in 1960, when most black folks in the sense were moving north. My dad decided to move south. I had experienced segregation, but I was only 14 years old. And we never went to Thomasville. We went to Deweytown. That's where black folks live. So I was protected. But in driving from New York to Georgia, once we got south of Washington, D.C., my father, and some of you in this room have never experienced a service station. That's a gas station where they actually did service. You drove up across a rubber hose on the ground, and it rang a bell, and the people who worked for the gas station actually came out to your car. and they would ask you, what can we do for you? And my father's first question was, do you have restrooms for color? If they said no, we drove off. If they said yes, that usually meant they had a men's room, a women's room, those were for whites, and then they had a colored bathroom that was rarely ever really clean, but that was for men and women. That was my experience. That was my history. And now, I'm in Vienna.
And how was that to be an African-American man in Vienna then?
First of all, it was strange, and I needed to be there a year. Because the first year, I'm getting my bearings straight. This is the first time I've ever lived away from my home. I went to Morehouse. We lived in Atlanta. My parents didn't have any money to give me to go to school, so I stayed at home. My first year, I had full tuition scholarship. Don't laugh. It was $500. This is 1964. But my parents could not give me any support. I was a Dummkopf. Because my first year I spent a lot of time in spelling and I lost my scholarship. Which meant then I had to work. I paid my way the rest of the time. And so being in Vienna, this is the first time I'm living on my own. I'm having to figure out how I can make it on $10 US a week. That's 40 Austrian shillings in 1967. So I ate at the cafeteria, but on Saturday evenings and Sunday, I had to buy my own food. That's when the economics class I took at Vienna came into play. I'm a history major. I knew nothing about economics. But at Morehouse, if you took the scholarship, you had to stay for a year, and then you came back to finish your senior year. So you stayed in college 5 years. The beauty of that was I didn't have to worry about taking courses in my major. So I took Austrian art, I took Austrian literature, I took all kinds of courses, along with the 5 hours of German. And it took that first semester to figure things out. One of the things I figured out pretty soon, Melvin Kennedy was over the program. Before I left, he called me to come to visit him. And he said, Ed, I know you're a Baptist preacher. Yes. He said, I better not hear that you went to France and did not drink any wine. And don't tell me when you come back that you had spent a year in Vienna and did not drink beer. I said, okay. But that's where the economics came in. A 6-ounce bottle of Coke was 4 Austrian shillings, 1/10 of my weekly salary. A half liter of the house beer was 2 shillings. Excuse me?
Economics.
That was an easy decision to make. And I found out that beer was pretty good. And it was enjoyable with a good meal. And so, haircuts I couldn't afford anymore. And despite the thinning of my hair now, I grew my first afro in Vienna. Because they couldn't cut my hair and I couldn't afford their cutting it anyway. I rarely wore a suit. I brought a suit because, I was a Morehouse man, and Morehouse man always had a suit and tie for fine occasions. I couldn't afford the dry cleaning, so I didn't wear a suit. But that year, that first semester, I walked every day to class, and they didn't have the shops they now have. They were small shops, the meat market, pastry. I got to know the merchants because I was one of the few black people in Vienna, other than the other IES students that had come from Morehouse and Stone. I was known as Vicer because I had a white sailor cap that I would pull down. That sufficed until it got cold. But they would say, Vicer, and I said, until I learned how to say, good morning. I then began to enter into conversations with people. I actually had to learn the language, and I got comfortable. The second semester allowed me to feel like Vienna was home. I no longer felt like I was a stranger. And as an African American, I didn't feel like I had any limits. I could sit in a restaurant over tea and talk for 3 hours. And I could go to the restroom that everybody else could go to. I found myself in classes able to compete with other folks. One of the worst aspects of segregation and racism is that despite the excellence of black people around me at Morehouse, there was always a question whether we were good enough because the society told us we were not. The society told us that even if you were an excellent honor student at Morehouse, you still weren't good enough to be at Georgia Tech. It told us that no matter how brilliant you might be in science and arts, you were automatically less than. In Vienna, I found out that was a lie. I wasn't as good as some of the top students, but I was as good as anybody else. And I began to see the humanity of other people. I began to see the humanity of the diversity in the culture. The director talked about 1955 as being an era of spies and intrigue. Well, in 1967, it was still that place. But it was an amazing place to be. It was exciting. One of the things that's blown my mind being here the last 2 weeks is to see all the people. And the population of Vienna in 67 and 68 was not, I would imagine, if it was 500,000, that might have been. So it didn't have this gaggle of folk. But it was an interesting, vibrant place. And I found myself, especially in the second semester, feeling like I was at home.